Chevstang. This is a 5.3 engine out of a 2006 Chevy Avalanche. Alright, so in the last video of this thing, we disassembled it and found out that the number 7 cylinder had a melted piston. I don't believe this was a ring gap issue. I believe this was just a lean condition or something like that. Number 7 is usually always the first piston to go on these LS motors. I don't know why. They just seem to always run hotter on the number 7 cylinder. So I think this next time when I put this thing together, I'm actually going to put a richer fuel injector in the number 7 and 8 cylinders, so the back 2 cylinders. I do have a replacement rod and piston here that I'm going to be replacing number 7 with. And I'm also going to be taking the bearings out of number 7's rod and installing them into the new piston and rod. These bearings all look very good yet. They're just really dirty. They've been sitting on the ground. But these bearings and stuff look great yet on every single one of these rods. There's really no need to replace them, especially on like my own personal vehicle. I don't really care to spend any money that I don't need to, so I am just going to run these bearings how they were. I ran the original bearings with the engine the first time I put it together, and now we're doing the rebuild here, replacing that piston, and I'm not going to change a thing. I'm not going to replace the bearings that worked just fine. So to start here, I did hone the cylinders just to give the cylinders a good surface again. It's always a good idea to hone the cylinders because the rings will have something to bite to on the cylinder then. They seem to work good, and I kind of had to hone it anyway because the number 7 cylinder had some piston material stuck onto the side of the cylinder. So I honed it, and now it looks brand new again. Next, I am actually going to take the piston ring. I'm going to take the top piston ring off of one of the pistons, and I'm going to match this piston to this cylinder. And I'm going to take the top piston ring off of that piston, and I'm going to insert it into the bore of the cylinder, and then push it down with the piston until it hits the second ring on the piston. That way the piston ring is evenly seated into the bore, and this is to check the ring end gap. Usually the ring end gap is a problem on these engines when you run like pump gas or like a shitty fuel. The piston and the piston ring will actually expand a lot more than if you were running E85 or methanol injection. So in my experiences, the piston ring end gap is not as important when you're running methanol injection or E85. But if you're running a pump gas motor and you want to push it really hard, it is a good idea to set the ring end gap big. But I'm going to check a few of them here just to kind of clarify where they're at. You just grab your feeler gauge here, and then you insert the feeler gauge into the ring end gap here. I'll show you. So the piston ring is inserted into the cylinder, and there is a very small gap between the ends of the rings right there, and that's where you want to stick your feeler gauge in to measure. That's about 21 thousandths, which is actually pretty tight. Honestly, if you got like a race motor and you want to go really fast, I'd set these at like 30 thousandths, and then the second ring 35 thousandths. So since this ring end gap on this cylinder here with this piston matched to that cylinder was pretty small, I'm actually going to take a file and file one end of the ring until we get about 30 thousandths on the top ring. And like I said, I'm going to do 30 thousandths on the top and 35 on the second. Make it super big so ring gap will never be a problem. I've also noticed that when you make the ring gap bigger, everybody says that you cause a lot more blow by and the engine will smoke more. I've never actually noticed a catastrophic difference in how the engine had blow by. So we take our handy dandy file here, and like I said, we want to file just one end of the piston ring. Who the hell? And it usually doesn't take too much to get the ring where you want it. I got the piston ring filed down, I'm going to reinsert it into the cylinder and check the ring end gap again. last time it was at 20 thousandths. Let's see if we can fit a 25 in there now. Nope. Still a little tight. So we're going to try a 24. Nope. 23. Yeah, right now it's around a 23 thousandths. Maybe 24. So we'll keep hogging on this thing. Also, another note, you only want to file one side of the piston ring. You don't want to file on one side and then another. You always want to keep one end a machined surface. I don't know why. I've just always been told that. There is special tools to do this job, but clearly they're not needed. You can just use a regular file. Now that I have the ring end gap set for 30 thousandths on the top ring and 35 thousandths on the bottom ring, or the second ring, I just kind of wanted to clarify what way the piston rings go onto the piston. The thicker of the two piston rings goes onto the second ring hole here, with the dot facing up. That's at least how I've always assembled these engines. I could be completely wrong, but it works for me, and this car went 10-1 pretty effortlessly. So yeah, and then the top ring, I don't think it really matters, but you want to put the shiny side up, and then like the oily part down. If you can tell on the ring whether the bottom is oily or the top is shiny. Like I said, I've put them in backwards different times, and it works either way, in my personal experience. I know it's not the right way. This is just kind of a backyard bottom end assembly video. Another good tip here is to put the openings of the rings 180 degrees apart from each other. So like the top ring is on this side opened, and then if you flip the piston 180 degrees, the second ring is open on this side. That way the piston rings will never be at the same opening and lose compression. So now I'm going to slide the crank so the journal is the farthest point down, and then the dot on the piston always faces the crank pulley or the harmonic balancer. And then you can grab your piston ring compressor here. This is just like a cheap AutoZone one. They all work great. I don't really have a preference on what one I like to use more. They all work just fine. You just gotta know how to use them. Alright, so the next step here is putting the piston ring compressor onto the piston here. And we'll just tighten up the piston ring compressor until it doesn't go anymore. There we are, nice and tight. And then put the piston into the cylinder with the dot facing the crank pulley or the harmonic balancer there. And then I like to take the end of the ratchet, or the file here in this case, and just make sure that the piston ring compressor is completely flat around the cylinder bore. That way the ring doesn't slip out when you push the piston down. And then just take the end of your ratchet, or the soft end of the file here, and just give it a couple hits. Just like that. And now I will repeat this same process for the rest of the cylinders here, so 7 more to go. And then we'll pick up when all the other pistons are installed. Alright, so now I got all the pistons installed. I set the ring gaps, 30 thousandths on top ring, 35 on the bottom. Like I said, I'm not a professional engine builder. I just do what works for me, and it may work for you too, so hopefully this video helps somebody out. But like you can see here, got all the pistons installed. I would show you the bottom, but that's on the, well, here you go. There's the other pistons installed. And now we are looking at the bottom of the engine where the connecting rods are going to go onto the crankshaft. So when you put the connecting rod onto the crankshaft, I always oil it up with a lot of oil, just because it does take like a couple seconds or whatever for oil to actually flow to the connecting rod, so you don't ever want to run the connecting rod dry onto the crankshaft. You always want to make sure that's nice and oiled. Alright, so now we are going to torque down the rod bolts to 45 foot-pounds, and I usually just snug them up first, and then do the torque specs. So just get them snug on both sides and then torque to 45. That's what I do. It works great. So I already did these ones here. We're going to move on to these ones that are accessible. Like I said, just go until it's snug. Same with this side. Snug. There's 48 or 45, whatever I set this thing to. There we go. And we'll rotate the motor a little bit so we can get at the other ones. There we go. Now they're all torqued down, and the mains were already torqued. I never touched them, so no need to mess with those. The factory spec is actually 15 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. You can, eyeball it. It doesn't really matter. It works out. You can be 10 pounds either way, I think, and it's not really going to hurt nothing. So next, we will be putting on the windage tray, which is just this plate that sits on the crankshaft main caps. It has a indication where the front is, and you just put the front towards the balancer and line it up with the studs on the main caps. That just sits on there like that. And then you want to install your oil pickup tube, which is right here. And the LS engine actually has a very common problem with this pickup tube seal right here, so you want to make sure that this seal is in good condition and doesn't look ripped or anything like that. One thing that does help quite a bit is I always put a little bit of grease on this seal before I install it into the oil pump. So we'll do that right now. I think the grease kind of just helps seal everything, and it actually prolongs the life of the seal, in my opinion. So I do this on injector O-rings too. I put grease on them, and it seems to help a lot. So I recommend putting grease on any like rubber O-ring seal. And then we just pop this guy into the oil pump, just like that. And it has a pretty pronounced like thud when it seals in there. And you should be able to tell if it feels good when you push it into the oil pump. Like that just felt great. So now we can put all the main girdle, or not main girdle, now we can put all the windage tray nuts on and the oil pump bolt. So that is pretty much a general overview of how to do a basic assembly of the bottom end, assembling the bottom end of your LS motor. So yeah, there we are. The only other thing that you would need to do is install the oil pan onto the engine here, which I am extremely picky on. I make sure the gasket is pretty good because, for one, I don't like it leaking, and two, if the gasket doesn't seal perfectly around these two holes right here, you will have zero oil pressure. Ask me how I know. The Buick Regal build that I did, that was like the first video I ever posted on YouTube, was the Buick Regal. That car, I had a shitty oil pan gasket, and it was actually blown out on those two holes right there, and the car had zero oil pressure. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little tutorial, or whatever you call it, how to putting your motor or bottom end together for your LS. And yeah, till next time, guys, thanks for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends if you guys got friends that are into LS motors and stuff like that. It helps the channel grow. Yeah, and let me know what you guys think of this little video here. Thank you.